Well, there was a lot of hype around this, and we finally have it now. This is Crossover by Donny Cates, Geoff Shaw, and this is a new Image comic coming out that promises to be the most ambitious, biggest comic ever. Is it that? It's not. That doesn't mean it's the bad comic. It just means, the hype machine was on. And so if you're picking this up expecting it to be the be all, end all of all comics, tying them all together forevermore, it's not that. But it is a solid story. So let's get into what Crossover is all about. Hey everybody, this is Perch. Donny Cates is a very hot name right now in comics. Everything he does gets a lot of attention, and he certainly is. He's writing his own show at the moment, and good for him. I mean, I think he's had a pretty rapid rise up in comics. I think here's where hopefully there's some good stable hands helping to guide and mentor him, so he doesn't fall into kind of the crazy ego traps and nonsense that other creators have fallen into when they've risen very, very quickly. But at any rate, he's putting out work that is resonating with people. And I think that's the key is regardless of how you feel about Donny, the companies he works for, the titles he puts out, what he does or does not do on social media. At the end of the day, his comics are landing with people. People find them entertaining, and so whatever end of whatever political spectrum or whatever you're on, you're finding something to enjoy in Donny Cates' books. So does it cross over to Crossover? And let's take a look. So basically, this comic opens up with an interesting couple quotes. We've got one by Frederick Wortham, Seduction of the Innocent, and also Kids Love Chains by Todd McFarlane, which is an interesting take. But this is a comic about comic books. And so as we lead into it, we see a person, a kid, reading a comic book, and we see that old kind of moire print, well, not moire, just the dot printing going on here, really reminiscent of kind of the titles of the 70s, that way color was done. And it's a nice throwback. It's interesting because I'm curious how many people will remember that comics used to look this way. Most people should. We aren't so far removed. But I think if this came out 5 years from now, I suspect some of this color effect would be lost on people. Like, is this retro? I don't quite get it. Because this is important. The fact that this is printed this way becomes very important as time goes on. So at any rate, this kid's reading a comic. We get some voiceover talking about, who's more real, Superman, comic books, or you. And it's some interesting kind of back and forth for whatever else. But what basically happens is as this kid's reading the book, it starts to bleed, or ink starts to kind of form on the book. And then there's some kind of light that shines, and an explosion or something occurs. And we see that basically in Denver, Colorado, January 11th, 2017, this world of superheroes, all the superheroes came bursting into reality. And says almost every fictional comic book character you've ever heard of has been cited amongst the chaos. And they reference like the Savage Dragon, Batman, Spider-Man, Thor, that people have claimed to have seen all these characters. Now, they don't use any of these. Copyrights are still copyrights. But basically, you see people running around screaming as buildings and things blow up around them, heads severed on pikes. You see all kinds of kind of crazy stuff. Discussions that the heroes are, that this is all hallucination, that it wasn't actually real. But it was real, and basically Denver gets consumed. And it says, a few months into the crossover, one of the supers had the bright idea to put a force field around the whole of Colorado. And as far as anyone knows, they're still in there. So this idea that the superheroes have been contained somehow inside of the state, I guess, of Colorado. Why you do the whole state is confusing there. I mean, I don't know. And like the whole state, like the Rocky Mountains. Anyway, I don't know. What am I thinking? Anyway, so that's the setup. Basically, the backdrop is that superheroes came in, and they blew up Denver, and they caused absolute chaos and pandemonium, and they had to erect a shield around it. So we fast forward a little bit to the here and now, and that's Provo, Utah. And the narrator in the background is continuing to kind of give little, is our narrator, is our observer from a distance. And we see a young woman who's dressed up sort of like a superhero, has a little mask on. We see, your standard hillbilly drunk white dude number 4 throw a bottle at her, and hit her in the head. And she drops her comics, so she picks them all up. And as she's basically, she's staring longingly at a picture of her family that in theory must be gone at this point, her name, we're told, is Ellipses, and or Ellie for short, or L. And she walks to her job, and her job is at a comic store. But along the way, she sees billboards saying things like "God hates masks," and we see what looks like a church group saying "Pray the capes away," and basically that wearing, the voiceover tells us wearing cosplay, working at a comic shop is considered by some of the more aggressively faithful types to be a front on everything. That the comic shop itself is a sinful activity. And so as she goes to her job, we now learn she's not a superhero, but she's basically heading into the comic shop that has protests going on. And there's an angry looking, our typical, again, fat white dude preacher. A lot of very stereotypical looking people in this comic. Anyway, he's kind of glaring. He's eating his sandwich, angry. He's having an angry sandwich. Like, arr. And so she goes into the shop, and she comes up with, our standard hippie looking comic shop owner. He's got a T-shirt that says "Wortham was right." He's not fat, so that's really the only lack of stereotype we get here. But anyway, the comic shop is filled. There's tons of people in here, and they're buying comics. And through an interaction with a guy trying to sell some comics, we learn that the government has basically started to put out government-approved comics that are either Westerns or, glorify police officers or that kind of thing. And this comic shop is for the original stuff, the comics that survived the burnings and the recalls, the original superhero comics that everybody is excited for. And so there we get some back and forth about kind of the shop and the fact that, this place, the world already fears and hates us for the things we love. This place is one of the last homes we have left. And you see a bunch of people in there who are, happily reading comics and buying comics, and there's a community there, but there's a sense that it's dying. So no meta commentary there at all. But at any rate, as they're kind of settling into the store, she's got her Invincible T-shirt on, and I could appreciate that. We see a boy trying to shoplift something, or somebody, a little kid, trying to shoplift something. So as they go over to confront the shoplifter, they discover it's a girl, and she's got the dot color pattern face, that she is not from around here. She is a comic character, basically not a human, and somehow she's here. How is she here? And so as soon as the hood comes off and people see that she's one of them, everybody goes running out of the comic shop. They run past the preacher and they say, "There's one of them in there. There's one of them with all the dots on them." And the preacher's like, "Is that right?" And so we basically, our two store owners try and comfort the kid. The guy wants to call the police, but she's not supposed to be out of the bubble. She's a fake, and Ellie is saying, don't call them that. And so she tries to kind of comfort the kid. Meanwhile, our preacher outside finds a sweater vest dude who is hanging out in a truck, and is his son, and says basically, "There's a path of redemption laid out here before you. You need to, basically do something for God, that these unholy idols have corrupted your soul, and you need to do it." He's got a black eye, and you kind of infer here that the dad punched him in the face because he caught him reading comics, in this case Super Squad comics. And so he hands him the comic, hands him the bottle, and the idea is like, you're gonna throw that in there and light the place on fire. Meanwhile, inside the comic shop, which still has some pandemonium going on, we learn that some man basically helped this girl escape, that her parents are still in there. Elle says, "Mine too." And there's this man who takes people out beyond the bubble or beyond the wall. That's how she got here. So they encourage the girl to draw the man who saved her, who got her out. Meanwhile, outside, we learn that the boy of this preacher, Ryan Lowe, has got his makeshift Molotov cocktail. He puts the comic in the bottle, lights it on fire, and basically chucks it into the shop. It crashes through the window and immediately starts a huge fire, burning the comic shop down. As fire engulfs the shop, which has the title "The Last Comic Shop Alive," we see Ryan kind of staring at the what he's done, and we see some voiceover talking about this is And we've been hearing all along, this is her story, this is Elle's story, but it's also his story too. And it says, believe it or not, this is a love story. And with the inferral that these two kind of very different people are going to come together, Ryan and Elle, somehow very different. Meanwhile, as they're trying to get the little girl out of the building and escape the flames, she looks down at the picture that the little girl has drawn, and it's this makeshift version of what looks like Superman. And the voice is saying, this is a story about hope. Of course, hope was what the S is supposed to stand for. So we get this very rough drawing of a super character with an S on it, which obviously is not going to be really Superman because DC would sue the shit out of them. But anyway, so that's how our comic ends. And we get the three ellipses that represent Ellie. And the little back matter of Donny Cates kind of telling him where he came up for the idea of this story, talking about death and life and life worth living. And, he wanted to talk about comics. This is a comic about comics, but is also big and bombastic and everything else. So it's way too early to say, here's what this comic's all about. But in a nutshell, you basically have this world where comics have invaded the real world. They've been contained because the two aren't compatible together. The real world has become, angry at the comics or basically blames them for this havoc that took a state away. And so there's this angry dynamic. You have a couple people who are still trying to protect the old comic world. You have this mystery of the little girl who's escaped, and how will it all play out? So that's where our comic is over there, and we get an issue 2 coming out with more shenanigans and a meeting between Ellie and Ryan. This is going to be definitely a long time in coming kind of romance, if truly the romance is where they're going with it. But that's our comic. So all in all, I mean, it goes pretty fast. It sets up some basic things. There's some new ideas here, and there's also some ideas that will seem very familiar to you. Is this book for you? I think if you are, it's definitely has an indie feel of wanting to do some meta commentary on comics, and there's a bit of a romance or a love story mixed in here as well. I mean, if you've been a fan of things like Undiscovered Country and some of those books lately, this probably will appeal to you as well. It's got a lot of the same kind of sensibilities to it. And, it may be worth picking up. If you like Donny Cates and you like kind of what he brings to the table, it definitely feels like a Donny Cates book. So there you go. Did you read Crossover? Are you interested in it? Did you like it? Let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications. Most importantly, though, thanks for listening.